Today's video is probably going to be one of the most important video I'll put on my channel so far. And it's also going to be much more advanced and require my audience to have either a high IQ or at least an open mindset to see this. So I'm gonna do what I did before. I'm gonna put timestamp below. I'm gonna split the video into 4 sectors. For the first one, I'll do, as usual, a long introduction of the people who is giving out ideas today. The second part will be 2 philosophical statements that will help massage my audience brain before I get you guys into the main content. And afterward, I will also give some of my own thoughts regarding to what I said today, and hope that people will find it more easier to see the world from my perspective on today's topic. Okay, today I'm gonna introduce you to this guy. His Chinese name is Wang Mengyuan, Mr. Wang. Again, I'm gonna do a quick introduction of him, his background, and then I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about him. Okay, he's a high energy physicist. He was born in Taiwan, but had spent most of his life here in United States. He graduated from either MIT or one of the good Ivy League school. He then went on to work for investment bank for many years. After that, he started his own startup company, something like a PayPal. He and his team make a lot of money in the first few months and then got shut down by the United States banking oligarch. But he made enough money during that time to basically retire. He's the kind of old school person who don't really use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just like me. I find a lot of his character to be just like me, to be honest. I also have a physics background, and I also work in the banking sector. I work also for merge and acquisition. And he's also very interested in chess. According to a few of his blog, his son is actually top 100 chess player here in United States, and he also worked together with his son to on improving his chess skill. I don't play chess myself, but I was a very good real-time strategy game player when I was young. I think many of my audience know what I'm talking about. Games like StarCraft 2. I was actually global rank 1 in StarCraft 2, Proteus. And then also I was global top 5 in games like Age of Empires, Empire Earth, Rise of Nation. Basically, all the real-time strategy games that I played, I was either top 5 or top 10, except for Warcraft. I just do not like spell casting. So when I first listened to him during one of the podcasts, I think the first time was last year, April, a year ago from now. I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I went on to listen to a few more of his podcasts. And what I realized is that of all the people in the world that right now, okay, whether it's my real life friends, relatives, or the people that I came to know on YouTube, he is the person who is the closest representation of me, my opinion, how I see the world, and the way of which I look at different problems and issues and different events. When he starts to speak, it's just feel like I am speaking, not him. And this is very rare. I'm gonna get to 2 of the philosophical statement he and another person made. Okay, before getting into the main content today, I want to massage my audience brain a little. Okay, so Mr. Wang had a podcast just last week, and during this podcast he said something I find to be very interesting. So he talked about this 30-point communication range. What that is I think is research done by a university over in United Kingdom. about how it is difficult to almost impossible for a person to explain to another person about a complicated subject, and geopolitics is a very complicated subject indeed. If the two person has a 30-point IQ or above gap in between. So if I have 140 IQ, it would be very difficult to impossible for me to explain my thoughts to someone who only has 100 IQ. So during the podcast, Mr. Wong said that his IQ is so high that he might as well not try to explain to his thought to anybody across the street, around the street, or anyone he met, because it's very unlikely for him to actually bump into someone who's within that 30 IQ gap compared to him. So I did some digging and I find that the highest IQ person, which is another Chinese, a mathematician here in United States, who claimed to have an IQ of 230. And let's assume for now that Mr. Wong has a very high IQ, let's say 200. So what he means is that it is very difficult for him to explain his thoughts regarding geopolitics, economics, and also high energy physics to people who are with IQ 170 or below, which 170 is also already incredibly high. And what he did is that over the last 10 years on his Facebook, like the Chinese version of the Facebook blogger, he spent 10 years and wrote 10 million Chinese syllables explaining how the US unipolar world works in very, very descriptions, okay? And let me just tell you what 10 million Chinese symbols represent. A Chinese Bible usually has about 2 to 3 million Chinese word symbols in it. So what he did is he wrote something equivalent to 4 Bibles, King James Bibles. And the purpose he do that is so that people who has IQ 60 or 70 below what his IQ is, which he didn't say, can also, through hard work and study, understand what he's trying to say regarding to the global economy and also the United States unipolar world and how it works. And during another podcast, it's the same podcast show, okay? But a few months before Mr. Wong made the most recent podcast, a professor of philosophy in one of the famous university in Taiwan actually came onto the show. They were talking about propagandas and how it affect the Taiwanese population when they see today's China, okay? And he make the statement. This is what he said, okay? He been teaching a master degree, political science or just philosophy class in the university, master degree again. So he said that in his class, only about 10 to 15% of the students actually have the logical analytical skill to form one's own perspective through constructive reasoning, okay? To dissect an event and actually form its own opinion on it. And 85 to 90% of the students in his class do not have that skill and can only memorize what's being taught or what's in the textbook. And you will kind of think that in a master degree philosophy class, the student probably will like to think a lot, will have higher ability to think. But even in that kind of class, only 10 to 15% of the student, according to him, has that kind of skill. So in real life, when we just meet people on the street, the likelihood of people actually able to really figure out geopolitical events is not going to be that common. Ukraine War 2022 marks the beginning of a major geopolitical power reshuffling, and it's the second time this happened since the Industrial Revolution. To understand what is happening today, we must first review what happened during the first power reshuffling event at the beginning of the 20th century. The process of this power reshuffling started before World War One and lasted until the end of World War Two. We can also theoretically call this the Succession War of the British Empire. Not many people remember it today, but the period between the late 19th century and the early 20th century is considered as the first globalization in human history. This period was marked by significant advancement in technology, transportation, and communication, which facilitates increased global trade, investment, and migration. Key events contributing to the first globalization including the expansion of colonial empires, the development of steamships and railroads, the establishment of the telegraph, and the adaptation of the gold standard. This era saw a dramatic increase in international trade and economic connection around the world, laying the groundwork for our modern day economy. During this era, the global hegemon, the British Empire, set global standards, share supply chains, and promote global integration. This is extremely like what we have experienced during the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century, in which the current hegemon, the United States of America, led the globalization movement across the planet. However, when the hegemon realized the globalization that they are leading, the supply chain sharing, and the dispersing of industry and manufacturing throughout the world is helping new rising power to challenge their global position in the world. Both the old hegemon, the British Empire, and the current hegemon, the United States of America, chose deglobalization to isolate themselves to secure their current position. In order for my audience to better visualize what is going on before or during World War One and World War Two, I'm gonna show you four separate pyramids. Okay, the first pyramid on the very left represents United States of America, with its Monroe Doctrine dominating the Western Hemisphere. The second pyramid here represents the British Empire, who hold the largest amount of colonies around the world, and also a portion of that second pyramid is also France, which France and United Kingdom are more or less allies during that stage. So I'm not gonna have France as a separate pyramid. The third and the fourth triangle here represent Imperial Germany and Imperial Japan. Germany don't really have room to expand their empires at the beginning, and later they have to turn their attention to Slavic territories for expansion. Japan has already made its move into Korea and northern China. So in one of Hitler's book, here I cannot pronounce the name of the book, he admired the might and success of the British Empire. And since Germany is a bit late to join the imperial game, and places like Africa and Asia and the New World is already saturated with existing players, so he has to place his focus on Eastern Europe. And since he sees the British rule in India as a model for how Germany should run Eastern Europe, you can say that the original intention of Germany is to do what the Americans did to the native Indians, what the British did to the real Indians, and what the French did to the Africans. So a subject of instrument and tool for his empire, okay? you can also say that Japan and Germany were both two imperial power that did not get to reach its full potential. And if you look at World War One and World War Two, you can more or less say that it's just a bunch of imperial powers fighting each other for dominance and space. Now, the following four pyramid is, I will say, how Germany and Japan want to see the world to be. So equally divided among the imperial power. Of course, that is unacceptable and almost nightmare for the existing hegemon at that time, the British Empire, because British Empire want to maintain United Kingdom as the top of the pyramid, or the biggest pyramid at this point. So that's why there's a huge war. Okay, now we're gonna talk about the current hegemon of the world, the United States of America. And this is going to be a little bit controversial, okay? United States, over its 200 years of history, launched and fought many invasion wars. Statistically speaking, there are over 400 wars that United States actually launched over the past 200 years. But US never directly fought another great power or major power without weakening them first with a third country or its allies. Okay, so if you look at World War II, United States didn't go in until the powers have fought already for a bit. And even for Japan was very extended across the entire Asia before United States actually declared war on the Imperial Japanese Empire. Its strategy is to always let the regional players fight each other first, and when exhausted, move in and dictate the peace terms. In addition, the US Empire used a much more passive model to project its power, much more efficient and sophisticated. There are three major components of US power projection tool: the US military, the US dollar, and the US propaganda. The first one, the US military, is actually the smallest and, relatively speaking, today, the weakest of the three components, okay? And this is especially true when you look at today, which US is heavily industrialized and its economy are more focused on service and financial sector. The second tool here, US media propaganda, is actually, to Mr. Wong and to me, the most powerful tool and component for power projection. The control and manipulation of the mind. That's the highest and the most sophisticated way of controlling a population. Like what rulers did in history, govern with religion, for example. God assigned me to be your ruler, and you have to do what I say to please not me, but to please God. By giving me your gold and silver, you will reach salvation. Today is more or less the same. Every time when United States go to war, when we pull that trigger, remember, soldier, it is for democracy and for freedom. It has nothing to do with oil, nothing to do with consolidate our monetary system power projection, nothing to do with containing another great power. It's for democracy. Remember that. The third tool is very complicated indeed. US dollar, representing the US-led global financial system. It was not exactly put in place at the very beginning, but the system and the institute were slowly put into place after World War II, which slowly the US-led system started to replace the British Commonwealth. And this system is put in a way so that it can extract wealth from other countries towards the US. And now when you look at United States today, this system is also working against its own citizens to redistribute wealth from the poor to the wealthy, to the middle class, to the wealthy as well, which is very unfortunate. This is an extremely complicated system, and there's many loopholes that is well hidden that favors the United States. So let's take a look at today's world power. And I'm also gonna use a pyramid to represent what is going on today, okay? And this is one pyramid. And United States has, over the past decades, successfully united the entire planet, more or less. And again, I'm using a pyramid because it represents the power between the ruling country to the subjects, okay? The top of the pyramid get to dictate the terms towards the bottom of the pyramid, the countries in the bottom of the pyramid. On the very top here is the United States of America. Right below it is the Five Eyes Alliance: Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada, and United Kingdom. Below that is the EU, Europe. And at the bottom of the top part of the pyramid lies Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And this top part of the pyramid will take several videos to explain how it goes. And at the beginning, I didn't understand it fully, but after taking a closer look, yes, this pyramid actually makes a lot of sense, okay? But I will get to that in another video. China and Russia entered this pyramid system relatively late, but as an important player, okay? China, with its large, hardworking, and also intelligent labor force, and Russia, with its massive amount of resources. When Deng Xiaoping opens up China, China is willing to enter the pyramid at that time as the bottom feeder, okay? Because whatever Soviet communist system didn't work really that well. But as China grows, original plan is to try to move up the pyramid and get to where Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan is. That's what the Chinese original intention, okay? But from the US perspective, that is unacceptable. To my understanding, this is because China is just too big. Too big. It's just like Russia was not let into NATO or EU. Actually, John Mearsheimer said this very clearly in one of his very recent video I'm gonna play now.
Money on defense. And American leaders have complained a lot about that. Barack Obama certainly complained about it. And then following in his footsteps, Donald Trump made a big issue of it. My view has always been that the United States was actually not that bothered by the fact that the Europeans didn't spend much money for their own defense, because that kept them weak and dependent on us. And as long as they were dependent on us for security, we had a significant amount of political leverage over them. So we, I think, liked that situation. And I might add, this is one of the principal reasons that the United States would never let Russia into NATO, because the Russians would always have a big defense establishment, and the United States would not be able to push the Russians around the way it pushes everybody else around inside of NATO. So the Russians had no chance of getting into NATO for that reason alone.
So this is exactly the same reason why China is not allowed to join the upper part of the pyramid. And from an imperial power projection point of view, okay, United States, it does not want a country that has the technology, the capital, and the human resources, which will eventually remove the leverage the US and the upper pyramid country place on the global south. Because this will allow the global south to grow in a way that will destroy the pyramid structure and how the pizza is divided. So again, from the US perspective, if China's general industrial capacity reached the level of Taiwan and South Korea, and let's say if regime change operations and destabilization operation is not working, US will have to force to cut the tumor out, preventing China from growing too big and challenge its current position. The size of China, again, is just too big. Today's China is willing and is capable of replacing the surface and products the golden billion were used to project its power onto the global south from a monopoly position, and to also consolidate their pyramid position and to maintain a higher standard of living because the monopoly player has the right to set the price. China is today willing to replace all that with the global south at a much cheaper price. And that will, not just will, but it's already happening, that will break the chain that the golden billion plays on the developing south. And this is what you are looking at today. And now I'm gonna show you a new graph. And this is what United States is trying to do to the world today, not just to China, okay? Is to break apart the pyramid, the upper part and the lower part. And then United States will try to destabilize, to destroy, and disintegrate countries such as China and Russia. And when Chinese and Russians are forced to surrender their position, then they will reintegrate back into the pyramid as it was, and probably as divided nation, not as the current united Russia and China, as one separate large nation as it is today. What China and Russia is aiming today is this: a circle, basically not a pyramid system, but a multipolar world system in which sovereign nations get to negotiate and discuss with each other peacefully and, relatively speaking, fairly to reach a common perspective in the future. But of course, from the perspective of the current hegemon, the United States, this is a nightmare because when you're already in a dominated position, you do not want to share any power and you want to maintain that existing pyramid system. So I really have no idea how my audience will respond to my video today, especially my audience from the West. And instead of trying to summarize and conclude, I will actually give you guys one of my personal experience, and then I will try to ask you guys some questions just to see if you guys follow my logic, okay? 20 years ago, I was in college and I had this midterm examination. The maximum point of that midterm was, I believe, 320. And it was not a small class, it was a class with over 300 students. And the midterm was 90 minutes long. I finished it in about 30 minutes and I scored it 295, I believe, around that part. And the average score of that midterm is, and I'm not kidding, 70 points is the average, okay? And a lot of the students end up taking the entire 90 minutes and struggle to finish the exam. The exam was consists with just one question, okay? It was a financial case study. It was 3 pages long with some multiple choice at the end, but the main part of the examination is just one long question regarding how long it will take for the business to break even, okay? In the equation that will lead to the answer, you need to use 15 numbers that came out of the case study. And the math was not that difficult at all. If you find that 15 numbers, you can have like a elementary school, junior high student to plug in the numbers and get the answer. It's not hard at all. But the problem is that the professor throw in also another 30 numbers that are just totally useless and has nothing to do with the answer whatsoever. And that confused many of the students and they don't know how to form the equation and get to the answer. And this was not just problem for the students in the class. The student in the class actually sent that examination to master and PhD math major students as well, and some of them couldn't get to the answer. And I find that to be extremely similar to what we experience today in geopolitical events. The reality of what is happening is actually not too complicated, I would say. But there's just so many disinformation, propaganda, and all kind of different theories floating around, and it confuses a lot of people, and they just do not know what exactly is happening, just like that midterm examination. So I'm gonna ask my audience today two questions, okay? To see if they get what I mean here. Let's assume that the relationship of United States and Mexico is not too good, okay? Which is not too good. If you look at the news today, there's a lot of arguments, and United States often threaten to send troops across the Mexican border to, hit on those cartel groups. And Mexico consider that to be unacceptable, and they will consider that as an invasion, okay? But let's assume United States is ready to do something like that, and it align, some troops and tanks across the border of Mexico ready to move into Mexico. And at that moment, the president of China, Xi Jinping, flies to the capital of Canada, Ottawa, and then get on stage and give a speech saying that if United States invades Mexico, the gas pipeline between Canada and United States will not move forward. All right. And the Prime Minister of Canada will be standing just next to Xi Jinping, and he will be like this. At that moment, would you still say Canada is a fully sovereign country? How would you see the relationship between China and Canada at that point? Okay, that's the first question, okay? The second question, let's assume for some reason, okay, Joe Biden here cannot remove Lloyd Austin from the position of military commander, and Benjamin Netanyahu have to fly all the way from Israel to Washington to actually remove Lloyd Austin and to install a new army officer leader into power in order for him to follow Joe Biden's order. At that point, will Americans look at me today and say that United States is a sovereign nation? What does democracy even mean at that point? So if you look at the two questions I just asked you and you do not get that instant understanding, then I'm not sure what to say. Geopolitics can be tricky, and this is a very simple illustration of how power, countries' relationship, how it works and how it sits. And if you look hard enough and you see all the evidence, you can see that pyramid structure easily. And to that end, I will end the video today, and I'll see you in the next video.